You head to the command center where General Organa is milling about with a few others. She turns to look at you in confusion as you enter. A few other species of alien origin turn to her, but she simply nods her head, clearing your entrance. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be here, you say immediately. That's all right, she says calmly. You know that she can sense your distress through the Force. Can we go somewhere private and talk, you ask? Just for a minute. I know you're probably busy here, but... It's fine, she says quickly. She turns around and gives an order as you head out into the hallway. She leads you into an adjacent room that looks like a large meeting room with a long table at the center of it and chairs on all sides, but you don't sit down. You're about to tell her about the dream, but for whatever reason, you hold back. You can't help but feel like you're being physically restrained from talking, although you don't know why. Is there some purpose for me being here? You ask her. Is there some reason why I'm being trained in all of this? She seems to sense that this is a misdirection as her brow furrows in confusion. I already told you why you're here. I want to protect Annie and keep you both safe. Did something happen? No, You rub at your face with both hands. A voice in the very back of your head is screaming at you not to trust her, but you don't know where it's coming from. You had trusted her for weeks, and she had given you no reason not to trust her. Look, Leia says firmly, taking both of your hands in hers. Right now we are planning an offensive strike against the First Order. Nobody has told you about it because nobody wants you to be involved. This isn't a war you want to be in, and I respect that. You've already done more than I could have asked of you, and... You shouldn't have told me that, you whisper, because you're not really listening to anything she's saying. The words, planning an offensive strike, keep swirling around and around inside your head, and you get the distinct sense that you're not alone in your head, but you don't know who else could be there, and if you don't know who it is, you're not sure you know how to keep him or her out. I think this is Snoke, you tell her. Or Kylo. You bite your lip. I think we've been doing a good job of protecting Annie because I think Snoke is coming after me now, trying to manipulate me through Kylo. What have you seen? Leia asks softly. Kylo, you tell her. He wants me to... You blink and your eyes widen. I told him where I was. I told him I was here. Leia says your name firmly, squeezing your hands in both of hers. Talk to me. Tell me, what does he want you to do? He wants me to take Annie and go to him, you tell her. He told me he can show me how to find him. Did he tell you anything? Leia's voice is urgent. Did he tell you how? You just shake your head sadly. No, I think I broke the connection somehow. I saw a lot of weird stuff and then, I don't know, the connection broke. Leia just sighs and shakes her head as she drops her hold on your hands and steps away from you. What do you want me to do? You ask her. Do you want me to try to open up the connection again? Try to find out where he is? Do you feel him? Leia asks, not looking at you. Right now? Not really, you say softly. I just feel like there's something, I don't know, in my head. It's hard to explain. Leia turns back to you. When you see Rey today, tell her what happened. Tell her to work on keeping your shields up. So you don't think that it was a dream then? You ask her, and she shakes her head from side to side. You are bound to him through the Force, she tells you, and I have no doubt Snoke is going to use him to try to manipulate you for your own ends. Try to keep him out as much as you can. Is this the first time you've had contact with him? The first time ever was my second night here, you tell her. But shouldn't you want me to keep the channel open? Won't it help to find out where he is? We have a rough idea of where he is, Leia tells you. We have other ways of finding out information, one that won't put you in any more danger. But if I can help... Leia just shakes her head. Talk to Rey. Let her help you keep your shields up. You can't help but let a flame of irritation burn in your chest. But if I'm no good to anyone, You're not good to anyone if you fall prey to Snoke's influence, Leia says firmly, but patiently. He is a lot more powerful than you know, and we don't know how strong his hold is on you yet. You suck in a breath, letting it out slowly. I know that you still care for him. I don't, you say firmly. It's a lie. You know it, she knows it, but you can't help it. I mean, I'm not going to give Annie to him, at any rate, so it doesn't really matter how I feel. I'll probably never see him again, so it's not worth thinking about, right? She walks over to you and puts a hand on your upper arm in a comforting gesture. She just looks at you pitifully, sadly, and you can't help the feeling that you're disappointing her. Or yourself. Or someone. You're not quite sure. You just nod your head and follow her back out into the hallway, running into Poe. Good morning, Commander, Leia says pleasantly. General, Poe replies with a quick salute before he notices you behind her. His head cocks to the side in confusion, and your heart drops. What are you doing here? Woke up bright and early, ready to go, you tell him. Came to see if you were here already and ran into her instead. I'll leave you to it then, Leia says, nodding to both of us. General, Poe says quickly. Shouldn't I, another time, Leia says as she disappears back inside the command center, and you stand outside awkwardly with Poe. You had no idea what that was about, but you assumed it was some kind of military thing. Military thing, Poe says quickly as he glances at you, and you nod your head. I figured. You know, I can go back and wait if it's important. You stop talking as Poe cracks a grin and shakes his head, and you walk out together towards the hangar. So, starting to like it here? He asks as you walk through the halls. It's still very early, and the corridors are almost completely empty. It has its perks, you reply with a shrug of your shoulders. It must, Poe replies. A few weeks ago, I never thought you would be the one waking up before me. You just let out a good-natured snort as you shake your head. I'm not a morning person. Nothing wrong with that, Poe replies, but you sense something teasing in his tone. I'm cranky in the morning, you continue, for no other reason than you still feel perturbed and don't want to deal with the silence right now. It's just your good fortune that you have to be the first person to put up with me as I wake up. And I don't mind it the slightest, Poe says good-naturedly. You try to think of something to say, some witty retort, but there is nothing, so you just open your mouth and shut it again as you fume quietly to yourself and follow him down the hall towards the hangar. You had graduated past the transport shuttle, and he was now teaching you how to pilot a light diplomatic corvette. It was larger and a little bit harder to maneuver, but not by much. Poe had taken you to space several times now, and you were starting to get the feeling that you actually knew what you were doing when you flew. He had even let you try navigating the edges of the asteroid ring at your insistence, but only the once. The experience of trying to predict the movements of the asteroids was taxing, even with the small amount of foresight that you had achieved with Ray's training. A few days before, he had pulled up a dense technical manual on his flight screen, an old Imperial Navy text on hyperdrive theory and its applications, and had talked you through it during that day's lesson, preferring to actively guide you in learning what you need to know, rather than just leaving you a thick volume of text for you to read. He assumed, quite correctly, that you probably wouldn't read it in your spare time, but he had still downloaded it to your datapad nonetheless, and asked you, nicely, to read the highlighted sections he had talked you through that day. After that, you couldn't really say no. The sections he highlighted skipped over deep theory and instead focused on the basics of hyperdrive construction and navigation procedures that were all a novice pilot needed to know. As you read through it, you were extremely thankful that Poe had talked you through the various sections in a way that you could understand them. Otherwise, the highlighted passages would have been almost impossible for you to understand, even with all the intimidating math and theoretical discussions you glimpsed over as you flicked from one page to another. During yesterday's flight, he had talked about how the way ripples behaved in a tub of draining water, how they just vanished near the drain. He went on to explain that was the way mass shadows worked in hyperspace, dropping you right out of it if you flew too close to them, and that really massive objects like stars and black holes actually had enough of an effect that you could physically crash into them while in hyperspace if you screwed up the flight path. You weren't really keen to continue with hyperspace lessons after that, but he had assured you that most hyperdrives were equipped with a feature that specifically prevented that from happening by dropping you out of hyperspace at a safe distance from the detected mass, although it burned a lot of fuel doing so. One reading he had assigned elaborated further on the topic, and one very important concept you noted was that you had to be relatively free of a large mass's gravity to jump to hyperspace, but there was theoretically nothing stopping you from dropping out of hyperspace close to a large mass like a planet, so long as the shadow detection system didn't kick in further away. Interestingly enough, the officer who had written that text had included an appendix to the chapter submitted by a naval cadet, which Poe had also highlighted. It looked a lot like the thesis text that you had read back at your old academia, and in it the cadet had elaborated on the mechanism of gravitational acceleration in hyperspace. The author went on to say that this was a tactical advantage the Navy could exploit only if a pilot was intimately familiar with every detail of his ship, and had the skill to write their own custom navigational algorithms provided by the main hyperdrive manufacturers and outlined on a procedural foundation for doing so. The writing was nowhere near as formal as the other passages you read. In fact, it was downright colloquial, as if the writer had simply jotted down his own thoughts on the topic at hand. It made reading it so much easier, and made his point a lot easier to comprehend than the last few chapters you had skimmed through, even if you didn't understand entirely what he was saying. As you reached the end, you realized that it was a reproduction of an Imperial Cadet's commissioning thesis submitted in letter form. As your eyes skimmed over the signature, you felt your heart drop in your chest. Respectfully submitted, Han Solo, Ensign Select, Imperial Navy, Kurita, Imperial Academy. This was the one and only glimpse into Han Solo's life that you had really seen outside of his sudden death, or gleaned from Rey. You had learned from her that he had apparently been a smuggler, and you couldn't help but wonder if what his son had done had any effect on his position, or if he had since left the Imperial Navy behind a long time ago, perhaps when he had met Leia? You wanted to talk to someone, anyone, about it, but in the end you had decided that it was simply best to let sleeping dogs lie. Han Solo was dead now. The past could not be changed, and you didn't want to stir up any more unpleasant memories than you probably already had. At least these thoughts served as a brief distraction from your dream last night, as Poe leads you past the Corvette you were expecting to fly today and into another room on the other side of the hangar that you had never been in before. Isn't the Corvette back there? You ask a bit nervously. As he opens the door to the room, the overhead lights flick on, one by one, and ahead of you, all you can see is what looks like a cockpit similar to the Corvette's on one side of the room and a large computer bank on the other. Poe just grins as he sees your reaction. Today you're going to apply everything you've been learning about hyperspace, but here on the simulator. Up until now, it was fine to just sit back and let you learn by just flying the ship, since I was there if anything were to go wrong. But with hyperspace jumps, it's a bit different. As you've read, if you were to violate the jump procedure and then engage the hyperdrive, it would proceed to perfectly accelerate us straight into oblivion of one form or another, much faster than I could react. This way, you can practice the procedures until they become second nature to you. Plus, most jumps from Dakar take at least a couple of hours, so we could only make one trip a day, even if it was just to Naboo and back. On the simulator, however, I can just instantly fast forward and you can do the next jump. Today we're going to start with several repetitions of the same 2 jumps, here to Coruscant on manual and then back again. Nav computers can always calculate the routes, but I want to make sure that you know how to plot a jump without a computer if necessary. I already downloaded the updated navigation package from the HyperNet this morning, so we'll go over those in a second, but before you look, I'm going to give you a little quiz. He gives you a wink and you throw your head back and groan as loud as you can, letting your voice reverberate around the hangar. What routes are you going to need for this jump, and how are they different from last night's reading? To simplify things, assume we've already jumped to Naboo and we're starting from there. You think back to the special conditions the manual had outlined for all the jumps to the galactic core from the Outer Rim. With the exception of Ryloth, no Outer Rim system specifically had a direct route to Coruscant, so you would want to stick to the established hyperspace lanes. You take a deep breath and, rubbing the toe of your boot into the heel of the ground, start off in a low mumble. If I remember correctly, the most efficient route would have been to Malastare, follow the Hydean Way to Danon, and then take the Corellian Run all the way to Coruscant, but thanks to the First Order and the destruction of the Hosnian system, that's no longer an option. So you'd have to follow the Hydean Way all the way to Brental and take the Perlimian trade route to Coruscant, which adds an extra, 7 parsecs to the journey, accounting for gravitational changes. You bite your lip nervously as you look back up at him for approval. See? Poe asks with his signature grin. You know what you're doing, so now go do it. Fly me to 000. You know what that is, don't you? You just roll your eyes as if you're offended by his lack of faith in you. 000 is the navigational euphemism for Coruscant, since its coordinates are 000. At least that was easy enough to remember. Good, Poe replies. If you fly us through a star, though, it would void the insurance contract, so try not to do it. It was that kind of humor you appreciated from him, until you actually flew straight through Corellia's star after misprogramming the jump in an attempt to correct for the Hosnian distortion and realized that he wasn't kidding. When it came to hyperspace jumps, small procedural errors in calculating a manual jump were anything but minor, and the red flashing craft destroyed stellar mass collision messages on your screen were just rubbing it in. And there goes the insurance payout, he chuckles, but you can't help but feel a bit frustrated. You should have caught your mistake, should have done better, but the bits of your dream were starting to come back to you, and you try to shake your head to clear it. You stand back as Poe clears the simulation's destruction notification from your screen and resets it to Naboo. Regardless, it's your first time calculating a jump, so it was bound to happen. Since it's just us here, sitting calmly somewhere in Naboo's vicinity, you don't have to do all of it from memory and rush the jump. Grab the procedure and walk through it step by step before jumping. You sigh and pull out your datapad, pulling up the jump procedure for the Corvette's hyperdrive, immediately noticing that you had missed not just one, but a few important steps while you were distracted. You try again, and once you had made it all the way through the procedure and were ready to jump, you look over to Poe for approval. He just motions for you to go ahead, his expression giving nothing away. You push forward on the lever for the hyperdrive, hearing the characteristic sound coming from somewhere behind your seat. On your screen, the stars lengthened and stretched into infinity before resolving into a vortex. After a few seconds, the vortex faded and was replaced with an image of Coruscant, along with the blue text, "Jump successful, route efficiency 87%. Not bad, Poe says from off to your right. Most pilots don't break 80% on their first jump. Let's do it again and try to see if you can get it up to 95%. That's as much as the old Corellian drive is capable of anyway. Nothing like the Falcons. After several rounds of this, you were starting to get the hang of things, and he started giving you new coordinates to jump to, sending you on a simulated hyperspace tour of the galaxy. As he gave you each new destination, you calculated the necessary route and even made the jump, following all of his instructions perfectly, even though your mind was somewhere else. Oddly enough, you weren't even thinking about Kylo Ren. You were thinking about Snoke. Kylo had told you that Snoke had been aware of your presence, and yet you had never met him. Considering Snoke had been manipulating Kylo for years, You knew he had to have had an influence on him while you were on the Starkiller base. He must have had an opinion on your relationship. If he knew about your presence, and he knew about the Force training, then you knew he was someone who himself was at least aware of the Force, and you almost wondered if he had the ability to probe Kylo's mind. If that was true, then Snoke would know everything Kylo said or did to you. What if Snoke was the one who had told Kylo to be nice to you? What if Snoke was the one who encouraged Kylo to let down your defenses, to make you fall in love with him? You couldn't really imagine what sort of purpose that would serve, or why Snoke would even care, but it suddenly seemed like a very plausible, but very distressing theory. What if Kylo never really loved you at all? What if your emotions had all been a game to him? What if he was truly a morally bankrupt person, and he was simply a puppet, an empty shell, following Snoke's every order, even if that order was to fuck you and make you think that he cared about you? You think back to when he had first come into your room at night and kissed you. At the time, you had thought that you were confused by your emotions for him, and at the time, you had no way of knowing that things would become 1,000,000 times more complicated years later. You think back to the time when he had made it seem like being intimate with you was a way of getting into your head. What if Snoke had been the one who had ordered Kylo to try to get into your head, and Kylo simply used his order as an excuse to get close to you because he liked you? That was certainly the more optimistic option, the more distressing one being the fact that Snoke ordered him to finger fuck you against the wall of your bedroom to leave you thirsty and aching for him. These thoughts were so disturbing that they carried on in the back of your mind through your hyperspace lesson, through the blaster range with Finn, where you unsurprisingly did worse than usual but blamed it on a bad headache, up until lessons with Rey. Your fingertips were practically itching by the time you walked into her green room. She was there, as always, sitting on the stone floor in meditation. "Did Leia talk to you yet?" you ask, wasting no time as you walk across the stones and plop to the ground in front of her. "Yes," she says as she opens her eyes, but her brow is furrowed. "I sense a great deal of anxiety in you." "I'm thinking it was never Kylo," you say quickly, eager to get out what had been floating around in your head throughout your day through your mouth. "I'm thinking it was Snoke, from the very beginning. I'm thinking he told Kylo to get in my head. I think he told Kylo to make me fall in love with him, to manipulate me, to use me, although I don't know what he was using me for. Maybe just for Annie? Maybe he was just using me and developing my Force abilities so that when I passed them on to Annie, they'd be stronger? Maybe..." "Hush," Rey says softly, drawing out the last H, and you close your eyes and let out a deep breath. You try to steady yourself, and you do feel a little bit calmer when you open your eyes. "I know that you said you would never comment on it, but what do you think?" you ask. "Do you think it was all just a tool of Snoke's manipulation?" "I can't answer that," Rey says firmly. "You know my experiences and my emotions towards him are quite different from yours, and it wouldn't be fair to taint your judgment." "They're not going to taint my judgment," you insist, although you think back to the part of your vision last night where you had been running away from him in the forests of Takodana, just like in Rey's vision. You couldn't explain that, or the snake, but maybe it was something from far back in Rey's memory that you had inadvertently latched onto. "How about this?" Rey suggests. "If you do well today, I'll tell you after." "It's a deal," you say readily. "So we're going to set up a mental shield in my head to keep Snoke out, right?" "Right," Rey says, scooting a little closer to you. "I'm going to try to get into your head, and I'm not going to really look for anything. I'm just going to sit there and wait for you to notice me so you can push me out." "Okay." You let out a deep breath and close your eyes as you can feel her fingertips on your temples. Her hands are cold, really cold, despite the humidity in the room, and you shiver a little bit as you stare out into the expansive blackness behind your eyes and wait. You don't see anything. You don't feel anything. In fact, aside from her fingertips against your temple, you feel more or less like yourself. Suddenly you feel it, a tiny intrusion, so small you could barely be sure you felt anything out of the ordinary at all. You put up a shield in your mind, pretending that there is a tiny barrier around yourself that no one can get through. You place it around your thoughts, letting it pulse in time to your breaths, in and out in a slow, constant, steady rhythm. There's a tiny prick of pain from elsewhere in your mind, and you feel a push, like Rey is trying to get in. No. You can feel the push getting stronger, but this time you don't have to mentally visualize anything to keep her out. When you had practiced with Kylo, you were always trying to mentally picture something, like a wall or a corridor, but now the Force had become second nature to you, and you could use your abilities without taking the extra time to create a visual space in your mind. But the pushing is getting stronger and stronger, and you don't know how long you can keep up your mental shield for. You can tell she's doing her best not to hurt you, but it's bordering on painful, and you can feel a tiny bead of sweat drip down from your hairline as your mental energies struggle against hers. Think of Kylo, you tell yourself, although you're not quite sure why. You know she had seen everything on Starkiller Base, but for some reason, your mind drifts back to the night he had first returned to you, the night he had named Annie. Somehow, deep down, you knew Rey had not seen that, and you let your mind drift back to what he had said. He had said he had made an unscheduled departure, and he had looked downright embarrassed at the time. It had been so many years ago, but maybe, just maybe, he had been so ashamed of coming to visit you because he really did want to see you, because he really did care about you, because he really did love you. Your breathing slows and you allow yourself to focus on that and nothing else. The thought that he really did harbor genuine affection for you. Maybe at least some of it had been Snoke's manipulation, but some part of it had been real. You knew that this wasn't the point of the exercise. In fact, the point of it had been to strengthen your mental shield to keep Kylo and Snoke out, but you can't help it. Your faith in him was bolstering your shields, keeping Rey out, even though she was driving herself full force against you. If you were strong enough to do that when she was sitting in front of you, then you were strong enough to protect yourself from their mental manipulations from far off in the galaxy. Rey senses something is wrong as she stops and pulls away. You couldn't get in, you tell her, but she stares at you with a disconcerted look on her face. Why are you thinking of him? She asks, like she genuinely doesn't understand. I don't... You shake your head quickly, as if coming back to yourself. Why had you thought about him in that way? All that morning you had thought about how he had been manipulating you, and now suddenly you were just as sure that he loved you? I don't know what's going on with me anymore. For once, you're not confused. You're not anxious. You're just defeated. It's Snoke, she tells you firmly. He is using your memory and emotions to try to manipulate you. But that's not Kylo's fault, is it? You ask her, genuinely not understanding. If he's doing all of this because he's been brainwashed by Snoke, then it's not his fault. It is his fault, Rey says firmly. He had a choice. He may have been manipulated in the beginning, but he chose to murder. He chose to go over to the dark side. That was his choice. Just tell me what you think, you say, just as firmly. Please, I know you don't want to, but I need insight from someone who isn't me, but someone who's seen enough of my head to look at the situation objectively and not just from what I've told them. I can't, Rey says as she sucks in a deep breath. Why not? Because I despise him, Rey snaps, her voice full of venom. You've never seen her anything besides calm and collected. You've never seen her let her anger take control before. He is a monster. There is no bit of goodness in him. She rakes in a shuddering breath. He kidnapped me, tortured me. He killed Han Solo, and he almost killed Finn. She shakes her head from side to side. I know you care for him, and you want to see the goodness in him, but there is only cruelty and fear in his heart. Any light he had left in him he has extinguished. He belongs to the darkness now. I'm sorry, you call out to her, but she's already stormed out of the room before you can finish your sentence. Your shoulders slump to your sides and you shut your eyes. Suddenly it made sense why she didn't want to talk about him. Those were painful memories for her to relive, and you constantly bringing him up as if he was the greatest person alive was probably too much for her. You can feel tears start to well up in your eyes as your bottom lip quivers dramatically. Honestly, what did it even really matter if Kylo really did love you back then? He was a different person now. He had done unspeakable things. He had tortured the people you now called friends, and he had never come back for you. He was reaching out to you now, but it was obviously only a ploy to get to Annie. Did he really think that you were stupid enough to fall for it? Did he really think that you were stupid enough, that you were so blinded by love that you would ignore the terrible things he had done and go running back into his arms anyway? Tears dripped down your face in earnest now because you wanted to. Leia and Rey and everyone else be damned. Everyone had been so kind to you here, and yet you still wanted to run back to him. Were you really that weak? Even if there was a force bond between you, weren't you strong enough to resist it? You put both of your hands together in front of your mouth and bite down on the back of your knuckle on your right hand to keep from crying out. I love you, Kylo, I do, but I can't anymore. I can't because it's wrong, because you've hurt too many people, and I can't do this anymore. I love you, but this isn't healthy, dwelling on you like this. I can't keep doing it. I can't keep... Suddenly you feel someone's arms close around you in a firm embrace, and for a moment you truly, honestly think it's Kylo, before you realize that it's Rey. Her eyes are red and she holds you tightly from the side, resting her head against your shoulder. I'm sorry for everything he's done to you, she says quietly, and you can't help but laugh. You're sorry? You ask. He's done a lot worse to you. But that's over, Rey tells you. I know he can't hurt me anymore. But you? It's been years, and he's still hurting you. It ends today, though, you say quietly. I have to let him go. It doesn't matter how I feel. He's done too many bad things, and I need to let him go. It ends today. It doesn't, though, Rey says quietly. It's not over yet. You didn't know if there was something she knew that you didn't, but a small part of you could at least sense that she was right. It didn't matter how much you debated this. It didn't matter how much you tried to let him go. The story was not over yet, and you still had a long way to go before you would get the answers you were looking for.